Nino Gaggi was born Antonino Gaggi on August 7, 1925, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan to parents Angelo Gaggi and Mary Scalise. He had two siblings. Nino was born to Sicilian immigrants, with both of his parents hailing from Palermo. Interestingly, on his mother's side, he was the second cousin of future mafia boss Frank Scalise. As a young boy, Gaggi would often help his father at his barbershop, doing odd jobs like sweeping up hair and wiping down barber chairs. He would go on to drop out of school in the 8th grade. He would also begin spending less time at his father's barbershop, spending more time in the streets. Eventually, after relocating to Brooklyn, Gaggi would begin associating with his second cousin, Frank Scalise, who was a capo in the Mangano crime family. Although Scalise was a capo under family boss, Vincent Mangano, he had previously held the title of boss of the family in 1930. When he was 18 in 1943, Gaggi would begin working at a loading dock after Scalise got a company to hire him. Not long after this, he would be promoted to the position of supervisor at this company. The company he worked for was more than likely under the control of the Mangano family. Also during this time, Gaggi would begin running a small-time loan sharking operation. By 1950, Gaggi had expanded his loan sharking operations. As well as this, he was now running a large-scale car theft ring that was overseen by Frank Scalise. While Gaggi was expanding his businesses, the family he was associated with would undergo some huge changes. On April 19, 1951, family boss Vincent Mangano and his brother Philip completely disappeared. Later that same day, Philip's body would be discovered in a field in Jamaica Bay in Brooklyn, with 3 gunshot wounds to the head. Vincent Mangano was never found. The Mangano brothers were almost certainly murdered on orders from family underboss Albert Anastasia, who would go on to be appointed to the position of boss immediately after. With Anastasia's rise to the position of boss, he would appoint Frank Scalise to the position of underboss. By 1957, Nino Gaggi had been formally inducted into the family, with his induction likely being sponsored by Scalise. Upon his induction, Gaggi would be placed in the crew of family capo Paul Castellano. However, in 1957, the family would once again be faced with a major change. It all started with Frank Scalise allegedly selling mafia membership for $50,000. When the other families were made aware of this, they were outraged. Due to this, on June 17th, Frank Scalise was shot and killed in the Bronx by 2 gunmen working under Albert Anastasia. Although the murder of Scalise satiated the other families, it would only bring problems for Anastasia. The murder of Scalise further alienated the family's Sicilian faction, which was previously led by Scalise. Anastasia was likely aware of the problems that would arise with the murder of Scalise. Due to this, he began conspiring to murder 3 prominent Sicilian family capos, Charles Dongara, Giuseppe Joe Riccobono, and Giuseppe Joe Biondo. However, before Anastasia could have the murders carried out, the 3 capos would be made aware of his intentions. Due to this, they were able to strike first, and on October 25th, Anastasia was gunned down while sitting in a barber shop at the Park Central Hotel in Manhattan. After the murder of Anastasia, the 3 men agreed to back family capo Carlo Gambino to succeed Albert Anastasia as boss. Gambino was the brother-in-law of Gaggi's capo Paul Castellano. With everything that happened in 1957, the commission would elect to close the mafia membership books indefinitely, making it impossible for any new members to be inducted in New York. In 1960, Gaggi would be given his first murder contract. Gaggi and a few others were given orders from the Gambino family hierarchy to murder a member of the family named Vincent Squillante. Squillante was condemned by the family as they feared he would turn informant after being indicted on federal extortion charges. Squillante was also a loyalist of Albert Anastasia, being one of his most prominent enforcers. Allegedly, he was the gunman responsible for shooting and killing Frank Scalise 3 years prior. On September 23rd, Gaggi and several others supposedly caught Squillante in the Bronx and shot him in the head, killing him instantly. After this, they would transport the body to a basement where it was incinerated. After carrying out the murder, Gaggi would continue running his car theft operation. Through this, he would be introduced to a young Lucchese family associate named Roy DeMeo. DeMeo was based in Canarsie and was associated with a Brooklyn faction of the Lucchese crime family, with this faction being heavily involved in car theft. Gaggi and DeMeo became close, and Gaggi would eventually invite DeMeo to join him in the Gambino family, offering him more money and control of his own operations. DeMeo would accept, and the 2 men would begin working together. As well as this, by 1967, Gaggi had officially introduced his nephew, Dominic Montiglio, into the family. Montiglio had just arrived back home after serving a 1-year deployment in Vietnam. By 1970, Gaggi had expanded his businesses, with Roy DeMeo acting as his partner in his car theft operations, and Dominic Montiglio working as a collector in his loan sharking operation. Also during this time, Gaggi and DeMeo would begin extorting pornographic film distributor Paul Rothenberg. During this time, the New York obscenity laws made pornographic film distribution illegal in the city. Due to this, the business was very lucrative for anyone involved, and Gaggi would be able to use Rothenberg to profit from it. However, in 1973, Rothenberg would have his business premises on Spring Street raided by police, and he would be arrested. Due to this, he would decide to turn informant. By July, Gaggi had been made aware of Rothenberg's cooperation with the authorities. Soon after, Gaggi got his capo, Paul Castellano, to approve the murder of Rothenberg. After this, Gaggi sent Roy DeMeo to kill him. On July 29th, DeMeo caught Rothenberg in an alley in Flower Hill, Long Island. DeMeo shot him twice in the head, leaving him dead on the scene. Meanwhile, on October 15th, 1976, family boss Carlo Gambino passed away at his home in Long Island. Due to this, Paul Castellano would be elevated to the position of boss of the family. With Castellano's appointment to the position of boss, Gaggi would take over his crew, officially making him a capo in the family. Also in 1976, the mafia membership books were reopened, allowing each family to induct 10 new members. Gaggi would immediately recommend for Roy DeMeo to be inducted. However, Castellano felt that DeMeo would be too difficult to control, and ultimately passed him over. Despite this, Gaggi persisted in recommending DeMeo to be inducted. Eventually, Castellano relented, and in 1977, Roy DeMeo would be officially inducted into the Gambino crime family. By the time DeMeo was inducted, he had already assembled a crew of young gangsters who were mainly involved in car theft and murder. The three most notable members of the crew were drug trafficker Harvey Chris Rosenberg, and DeMeo's two top enforcers, Joseph Testa and Anthony Center. DeMeo also bought a bar in Flatbush, Brooklyn called the Gemini Lounge. This bar was mainly used as a base for the crew to kill people and dismember their bodies in the back room. On June 7, 1978, Gaggi would be indicted on racketeering conspiracy charges stemming from his involvement in a fraudulent bankruptcy scheme. However, charges against him would be completely dismissed in December of that year. By 1979, Gaggi was back on the streets and leading his crew. That year, Nino Gaggi and Roy DeMeo would be faced with an issue. Two soldiers working under Gaggi, James Ippolito Sr. and his son James Ippolito Jr., went to Paul Castellano and accused Gaggi and DeMeo of being involved in drug trafficking. During this time, Castellano had a very strict rule against dealing drugs, mainly due to the heavy law enforcement scrutiny it would bring down. Due to this, Gaggi and DeMeo were called to a meeting with Castellano. Although Gaggi's crew were technically involved in the drug trade through DeMeo's associate, Chris Rosenberg, Rosenberg wasn't a made man in the Gambino crime family, making it perfectly acceptable for Gaggi and DeMeo to profit from the drug trafficking business through Rosenberg. However, as well as this, James Ippolito Sr. attempted to claim that Gaggi was an informant, likely hoping that this would result in Castellano granting him permission to murder Gaggi. Castellano ultimately sided with Gaggi and DeMeo in the drug business accusation. As well as this, there was no evidence that Gaggi was ever an informant. Due to this, Gaggi would ask for Castellano to sanction the murders of the Ippolitos, something that Castellano agreed to. On October 1st, James Ippolito Sr. and his son were sitting in a car parked on Coney Island in Brooklyn when they were approached by three men. The three men were Roy DeMeo, Nino Gaggi, and one of Gaggi's soldiers, Peter Piacenti, with it being likely Piacenti wasn't actually aware of what was about to happen. Despite being a capo, Gaggi had no problem involving himself in carrying out murders. Due to this, he and DeMeo fired into the car, striking the two men. Gaggi fatally shot Ippolito Jr. and DeMeo fatally shot Ippolito Sr. After this, the three men parted ways. DeMeo went one way and Gaggi and Piacenti went another. Unfortunately, however, Gaggi and Piacenti were caught walking away from the scene of the crime by a police officer. The officer raised his gun and demanded the two men surrender. As soon as the officer made his presence known, Gaggi began shooting at him. The officer took cover and was able to hit Gaggi, with Piacenti also getting shot. Piacenti was shot in the hip. Gaggi, however, was struck in the neck. Despite Gaggi's severe wound, he would make a full recovery, as did Piacenti. After Gaggi and Piacenti recovered, they were both charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. On March 6, 1980, Gaggi and Piacenti were both acquitted on the murder charges, as well as the attempted murder charge. However, they were convicted on a lesser assault charge. Due to this, on April 18, the two men were sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. They were most likely cleared on the more serious charges as a result of Gaggi's crew bribing one of the jurors. Meanwhile, Roy DeMeo was made acting capo of Gaggi's crew. Sometime after Gaggi's trial, DeMeo would get permission from Paul Castellano to murder 21-year-old Patrick Penny, who was a witness in the trial. On May 12th, Penny was shot and killed outside a bar in Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. On September 20th, Paul Castellano's ex-son-in-law, Frank Amato, was lured to the Gemini lounge under the pretense of meeting with Roy DeMeo to discuss business. When Amato arrived, he was shot to death with a machine pistol by DeMeo. After he was killed, his body was taken to the back of the Gemini Club, where it was dismembered by DeMeo with the help of Joseph Testa and Anthony Center. The remains were taken out to sea and disposed of. Allegedly, Paul Castellano ordered the murder of Amato because he subjected his daughter to domestic violence while they were married. Although these two murders were authorized by Castellano, by this point, Roy DeMeo and his associates had allegedly already committed more than 40 murders, with most of them being unauthorized. While this was going on, Gaggi's nephew Dominic Montiglio was still working under his uncle, with him witnessing a great number of these murders. In 1981, Nino Gaggi and Peter Piacenti were released from prison after their convictions were thrown out. The reason for this was that the juror they had bribed accused the prosecution of misconduct. With that, Gaggi was back on the streets and able to run his crew. By 1983, the FBI had increased their surveillance of the Gaggi crew, with them mainly investigating their car theft operations. However, things would soon escalate. During this time, Paul Castellano became aware of the DeMeo crew's numerous unsanctioned murders. As well as this, Castellano became worried that Roy DeMeo would turn informant if he were arrested. Due to all this, Castellano would elect to have DeMeo killed. The main problem Castellano had was finding anyone willing to carry it out, with even the Gotti crew being unable to take on the contract. Eventually, however, Castellano would make a deal with Gaggi and some of DeMeo's associates. On January 10th, Roy DeMeo would be lured to the house of a Gambino family associate. When DeMeo arrived, he would be shot multiple times in the head and chest, with the shooters allegedly being Joseph Testa and Anthony Center. His body was then hidden in the trunk of his 1983 Cadillac, with the car being parked at Emmons Avenue and East 28th Street in Sheepshead Bay. His body would later be discovered on January 20th. Also during this time, Gaggi's nephew, Dominic Montiglio, was arrested by the FBI and questioned in relation to the Gaggi crew's operations. Montiglio feared that he would eventually be killed due to his cocaine and alcohol addictions. Due to this, he would ultimately decide to inform on his uncle and other members of the Gaggi crew. Montiglio's information wasn't limited to just car theft. He would also give the feds information that tied the Gaggi crew to at least 25 murders. Ultimately, Montiglio's information resulted in a 51-count federal indictment that came down against several members of the Gambino crime family, with charges even reaching the boss, Paul Castellano. On March 30th, 1984, Paul Castellano, Nino Gaggi, and 19 others were formally charged in the indictment. Castellano was able to pay bail while Gaggi remained in prison. In 1985, Paul Castellano would be indicted once again on federal charges, this time in a case that involved the entire Mafia Commission. Castellano would also be granted bail in that case. However, before Castellano could be brought to trial on either of the federal cases, he and his underboss, Tommy Bellotti, would be gunned down in Midtown Manhattan on December 16, 1985. Castellano's murder was orchestrated by family Capo, John Gotti, and his close associate Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano. With Castellano's murder, John Gotti would take over as boss of the Gambino family, with Gravano being appointed to the position of underboss. As for Nino Gaggi, he would be convicted in 1986 for trafficking stolen cars. However, before he could be tried on the additional charges, he would suffer a fatal heart attack while being held at the Metropolitan Correction Center in Manhattan on April 17, 1988.